Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. And today is a special day because we're celebrating Hobbit Day, September 22nd, the birthdays for both Bilbo and Frodo Baggins. And for the last few years, in celebration of the event, the Tolkien YouTube community has collaborated on a playlist across our collective channels. I'll put a link to the playlist in the description, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the video offerings myself. I'm just honored to be a part of it. For this year's Hobbit-related topic, I'm going to talk about one of Tolkien's poems, though not a poem from the Lord of the Rings. This poem is entitled The Seabell, but it's also known as Frodo's Dream. It's a dark poem, contains a glimpse into Frodo's state of mind upon returning to the Shire after the War of the Ring. First, a bit of background into the poem. It was originally published in 1934 in the Oxford magazine under the title Loony. Note that date is before The Hobbit was published, much less Lord of the Rings. But in 1962, a significantly revised version of the poem, double in length, was published in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and that poem was called The Seabell. In the preface, Tolkien makes some intriguing observations, which I'll read for you now. Note that when Tolkien references number 15, he's referring to the 15th poem in the book, aka The Seabell. The verses of Hobbit origin here presented have generally two features in common. They are fond of strange words and of rhyming and metrical tricks. In their simplicity, hobbits evidently regarded such things as virtues or graces, though they were, no doubt, mere imitations of elvish practices. They are also, at least on the surface, light-hearted or frivolous, though sometimes one may uneasily suspect that more is meant than meets the ear. Number 15, certainly of Hobbit origin, is an exception. It is the latest piece and belongs to the Fourth Age, but it is included here because a hand has scrawled at its head, Frodo's Dream. That is remarkable, and though the piece is most unlikely to have been written by Frodo himself, the title shows that it was associated with the dark and despairing dreams which visited him in March and October during his last 3 years. But there were certainly other traditions concerning hobbits that were taken by the wandering madness, and if they ever returned, were afterwards queer and uncommunicable. The thought of the sea was ever present in the background of Hobbit imagination. But fear of it, and distrust of all elvish lore, was the prevailing mood in the Shire at the end of the Third Age. And that mood was certainly not entirely dispelled by the events and changes with which that age ended. So we're told that this poem is an exception to the rest of the contents of the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And in one of his letters, Tolkien wrote that the Seabell was the poorest of poems for this collection. Quote, "and not one that I should really wish to include, at least not with the others." And it's that point at the end, at least not with the others. I think his issue with this poem was that tonally, it's pretty grim stuff, as you'll see. In contrast to The Man in the Moon Stayed Up Too Late, for instance. But I think his fears about the poem's reception were put to rest when he received a letter from W.H. Auden calling the Seabell wonderful. Tolkien wrote back, "I was greatly cheered by your praise of Frodo's Dream. That really made me wag my tail. I hope we can meet again soon." Okay, so what is Frodo's Dream all about? It's written in the first person, and though we're never told the narrator's name, the preface tells us that it was associated with the dark and despairing dreams which visited Frodo in March and October during his last 3 years. Why March and October? Because on March 13th, he was poisoned by Shelob, on March 25th, the ring was destroyed, and on October 6th, he was stabbed by the Witch King on Weathertop. All three of those events created recurring residual pain in Frodo on their anniversaries. Maybe a bit of PTSD as well, sort of an anti-Hobbit day. Our protagonist journeys to a magical land across the sea. Not hard to see the parallels there. I walked by the sea, and there came to me as a starbeam on the wet sand, a white shell like a seabell. Trembling, it lay in my wet hand. In my fingers shaken, I heard waken a ding within, by a harbor bar, a buoy swinging, a call ringing over endless seas, faint now and far. Then I saw a boat silently float on the night tide, empty and gray. It is later than late. Why do we wait? I leapt in and cried, bear me away. So this seashell facilitates the protagonist's journey to Aman in the west. It's reminiscent of the dream Frodo had in Crick Hollow in the Fellowship of the Ring. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off. A sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly, he found he was out in the open. There were no trees after all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower, standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea. So there's a similarity in the pull of the sea in these dreams. The physical manifestations of the sounds of the sea are different, but the allure of the unknown is there. Our protagonist then sails west and arrives in Aman. Back in the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo has another dream while at Tom Bombadil's house, fitting given the title of this collection of poems, in which he visualizes what arriving at his destination will be like. That night they heard no noises, but either in his dreams or out of them, he could not tell which. Frodo heard a sweet singing running in his mind. A song that seemed to come like a pale light behind a gray rain curtain, and growing stronger to turn the veil all to glass and silver, until at last it was rolled back, and a far green country opened before him under a swift sunrise. Those lines spoken so eloquently by Ian McKellen in the Return of the King film. And here is what our protagonist finds at the end of his journey west in the Seabell. It bore me away, wetted with spray, wrapped in a mist, wound in a sleep to a forgotten strand in a strange land. In the twilight beyond the deep I heard a sea bell swing in the swell, dinging, dinging, and the breakers roar on the hidden teeth of a perilous reef. And at last I came to a long shore. White it glimmered, and the sea simmered with star mirrors in a silver net. Cliffs of stone, pale as rule bone in the moon foam, were gleaming wet. So again, not exactly the same description, but some similarities. For instance, a veil of silver and glass versus star mirrors in a silver net. So our protagonist explores this new land, taking in its wonders. Flowers lay there like fallen stars, and on a blue pool, glassy and cool, like floating moons and nenuphars. He searches for the inhabitants of this land, but they're always just out of reach. I heard dancing there, music in the air, feet going quick on the green floors. But wherever I came, it was ever the same. The feet fled, and all was still. Never a greeting, only the fleeting pipes, voices, horns on the hill. This is similar to Bilbo and the dwarves' experience traveling through Mirkwood in The Hobbit, always one step behind the ethereal wood elves. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered around the trunks and looked into a clearing where some trees had been felled and the ground leveled. There were many people there, elvish-looking folk, all dressed in green and brown, and sitting on sawn rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in their midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees round about. But most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of the roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring with the one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire and it went up in rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, and they could not even find one another. Not for a long time, at any rate. Much like Bilbo and the dwarves, our protagonist becomes frustrated, feeling isolated in a world filled with strangers. And so, our protagonist makes a rash, ultimately foolish choice. He declares himself king. Of river leaves and the rush sheaves, I made me a mantle of jewel green, a tall wand to hold, and a flag of gold. My eyes shone like the star sheen. With flowers crowned, I stood on a mound, and shrill as a call at cockcrow, why do none speak wherever I go? Here now I stand, king of this land, with gladdened sword and reed mace. Answer my call, come forth all, speak to me words, show me a face. This is going to go terribly for our protagonist in the next line, which I'll get to in a second. I just have to note that our protagonist makes a mace out of a reed and a sword out of a gladden. A gladden is a yellow iris, and it holds a lot of meaning in Middle-earth. The disaster of the Gladden Fields is where the then king, Isildur, lost the ring and was subsequently killed. It's not a coincidence that a gladden is referenced in the same line that our protagonist declares himself king of this land. For Frodo, Isildur is a fellow ring-bearer as well, and one who ultimately failed to destroy the ring. Our protagonist is about to be punished by the land he claimed to rule. Black came a cloud as a night shroud. Like a dark mold groping, I went to the ground falling, on my hands crawling with eyes blind and my back bent. I crept to a wood, silent it stood in the dead leaves. Bare were its boughs. There must I sit, wandering in wit while owls snored in their hollow house. For a year and day, there must I stay. Beetles were tapping in the rotten trees, spiders were weaving, in the mold heaving, puffballs loomed about my knees. So darkness covers the land, and our protagonist, blinded by the darkness, is forced to hide in a grove of dead trees for a year and a day. I feel an element here of Gollum, hiding out in the darkness of the Misty Mountains. And of course, where did he acquire the ring by murdering Dago? The Gladden Fields. After the year and a day, the darkness recedes, and our protagonist, realizing he doesn't belong here, tries to find his way back to the sea while he has the light. At last there came light in my long night, and I saw my hair hanging gray. Bent though I must be, I must find the sea. I have lost myself, and I know not the way, but let me be gone. Then I stumbled on, like a hunting bat's shadow was over me. In my ears dinned a withering wind, and with ragged briars I tried to cover me. My hands were torn, and my knees worn, and years were heavy upon my back, when the rain in my face took a salt taste, and I smelled the smell of sea-wrack. Birds came sailing, mewing, wailing. I heard voices in cold caves, seals barking, and rocks snarling, and in spout holes the gulping of waves. Winter came fast. Into a mist I passed, to land's end my years I bore. Snow was in the air, ice in my hair, darkness was lying on the last shore. There still afloat waited the boat in the tide lifting, its prow tossing. Wearily I lay as it bore me away, the waves climbing, the seas crossing. That line, I have lost myself and I know not the way, very reminiscent of the line Frodo gives at the Council of Elrond when he says, I will take the ring, though I do not know the way. True, on one level, it's, I don't know the way to Mount Doom. But there's also an undercurrent of, I don't know the way, and I could lose myself. We also see that time passes differently here. Even though it was only a year and a day, our protagonist now has gray hair and a bent back. When the Fellowship stayed in Lothlorien under the care of Galadriel and the Ring Nenya, Sam was amazed that they'd been there for a month when it seemed like only a few nights. So Frodo is acquainted with visiting the land of the Fae. Our weary and regretful protagonist has escaped the West and successfully returns home. But it's not the home he remembered. Houses were shuttered. Wind round them muttered. Roads were empty. I sat by a door, and where drizzling rain poured down a drain, I cast away all that I bore. In my clutching hand, some grains of sand and a seashell, silent and dead. Never will my ear that bell hear. Never my feet that shore tread. Never again. As in sad lane, in blind alley, and in long street, ragged I walk. To myself I talk, for still they speak not, men that meet. Our protagonist returns home, knowing he can never sail west again, even if he wanted to. But now he's an old man living in alleyways, muttering to himself because his own people shun him. Another strong tie into Gollum. Remember in the preface how Tolkien mentioned, but there were certainly other traditions concerning hobbits that were taken by the wandering madness, and if they ever returned, were afterwards queer and uncommunicable. That's how he's describing the protagonist of this poem. The Seabell has a feel of an Irish Imrum, a story in which a hero crosses the sea to a fairy world and returns changed. So what does this dream suggest about Frodo's state of mind in the months leading up to his departure from the Grey Havens? We get an idea of Frodo's emotions in this incredibly heartfelt goodbye to Sam, moments before sailing away to the west forever. "But," said Sam, and tears started in his eyes, "I thought you were going to enjoy the Shire too, for years and years, after all you have done." "So I thought too once, but I've been too deeply hurt, Sam. I tried to save the Shire, and it has been saved, but not for me. It must often be so, Sam, when things are in danger. Someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them. But you are my heir. All that I had and might have had, I leave to you." So Frodo already feels like the protagonist at the end of the poem. He hoped to go on this quest and return to his old life, but he's too changed, too deeply hurt. And perhaps the dream in which the protagonist sails west only to be shunned by its inhabitants is Frodo's fear, that he doesn't really belong there either. He's lost, adrift. And the fact that the protagonist tries to announce himself ruler of that land, and thus incurs a terrible punishment, is perhaps a reflection of Frodo's own guilt. While the ring was destroyed, Frodo failed to destroy it. We get the line from the Return of the King. "I have come," he said, "but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." Frodo was certainly a hero and did all that could have been asked for him and more. But I think this dream reveals his own self-punishment for ultimately succumbing to the lure of the power of the ring. And so we get this melange of Frodo's anguish at what he's lost, what being a ring bearer cost him, and his fears about the next stage of his journey. I believe those fears are unfounded. He will find peace in the West, and for a time be with Bilbo and eventually Sam. But in this moment in time, the Seabell, aka Frodo's dream, shows us a Frodo with one foot in the Shire and one foot in Aman, doubting whether he belongs in either realm. So there you have it. A bit grim, but a really impactful piece of lore. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy Hobbit Day, everyone! Be sure to check out the Hobbit Day playlist in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye!